Okay.
All right. Good morning. I'm Richard Freeman, the convener of Future Historians, and we're going to have a discussion today of some of the papers that have been written by participating historians, and also look at our need to create small groups to move this along. Barry has been consistent on suggesting this, and so has Dan. Dan, introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Dan Hort.
Say a couple of things about yourself.
I do a lot of communications, mailings, this type of thing. I also work with a lot of comic book people, do a variety of Afrofuturism, a lot of Caribbean art, that type of stuff. And the reason I wasn't with us last week was because I was at a fantasy sci-fi art exhibit in Reading, Pennsylvania.
Fred, say hello.
Okay, just a moment. Hello, Fred Murphy here. I'm working a lot with Richard on the technical side of this project, as well as discussing and supplying content on many aspects. So happy to be here.
Barry.
Yeah, good morning, everyone. Well, I'm in Chicago here, and well, a long-time believer in the possibility of a better world, and not too politically involved otherwise for quite a while, seeking to re-engage.
Barry, I didn't know you were in Chicago. I saw you on the coast. How did I get confused?
Nope, Chicago, on the lake.
Well, do you know Peter Hudis, who is also in Chicago?
No. No.
Well, when he gets back from India, you two should get together.
Perhaps.
He's a marvelous, marvelous person.
Uh-huh.
I can't see.
Yeah, I heard
Oh,
at the first meeting, I guess it was. He was part of this.
Yes. Thank you. David?
Yeah, greetings, everyone. I'm in Washington, D.C. What can I say? I think I've met everyone already, but I sent a few of you a recent article I wrote for a symposium on post-carbon. If anyone is interested, I think I should probably put the URL in the box. Thank you.
David is a climate scientist and a longtime activist in the DC area. Now, who's next? Dan? Oh, Jason.
Well, I'm next. Good morning. I'm Jason. I'm in the DSA and a union activist and do other things. Good morning, everybody.
Sam?
Hi, I'm Sam. I'm on the West Coast, so we're here 8:14 a.m. Pacific time. So I am waking up. That's the agenda here. Get up in the morning, maybe get some tea, get some breakfast. This afternoon, I'll collect some fruits and vegetables to give tomorrow to a food bank.
Okay. Well, now, just to remind everybody, last week we made a fairly serious attempt to get better organized. And so we wanted to get everybody active, posting articles, commenting on them, and then a new idea, which is to conduct our business like an actual historical seminar, or really a committee of a journal or a publication, and the publication in this case is a textbook for young people, which is organized not as a narrative history, but as a succession of topics, and each topic the textbook talks about now, 2117, and then looks at the past, then, and how we got from here, from there to here. So we decided to take that more seriously. In the Dropbox, under this month's or this week's topic, Catastrophes, a folder called Add to Wiki, in which the papers would be deposited. The ones that I've deposited were based on a very simple thing. They were then papers, and all I did was to take one of the excellent articles that were posted by people, copy them into a doc file, and then slash them down to the essentials, to the part that we wanted to put up on our history wiki under then, and then turn all of the verbs into the past tense and cutting out words like today. Okay? And this turned out to be, for me, and others now have done this and had exactly the same experience, which is that a kind of magic takes place. And the things that all of us tear out our hair, and the writers that we read are all far left and semi-hysterical because they see these catastrophes coming, and the world is in denial about them for reasons that we know and need to put in as part of the history. But by seeing these things as already over and done, and potentially leading to movements that will change the world, is utterly magic. So I'd like to encourage people to do more of that, and let's look at the ones that we've got in that box. David, I know, put in his 4 futures and transformed into the past. Barry put in a very interesting paper in which he made our group, or something like our group, an actual character, and discussed what we were thinking of. And Fred, could you just look, open that box and see what else is in there? Oh, that's it? Oh, that's Barry's paper. Yeah, what are the other papers we're supposed to discuss today? Oh, I think I put one in.
Isn't that add to wiki or?
Yeah, add to wiki.
Well, there they are.
All right. So, oh, the food crisis, I did one. Okay. And did you put anything in, Fred?
Not in this box.
Okay, but we can also talk more generally about the topics. But since we've got these papers, let's go ahead and discuss them. Who wants to start by just presenting your paper in a few words? Barry?
Yeah.
Well, I think you need to say a few words about your paper, because you posted it like a schoolboy just before it was due. And I think since I had insomnia last night, I may be the only one that had a chance to read it. And I left you a few comments. Procedure that we're all supposed to be doing, but as you can see, we're kind of limping on one leg here.
Yeah, well, I mean, I can't completely explain the paper. I guess since the first class, I've been trying to sort of get a grip on, on what the intent of our collaboration is, and what's actually going on, and how, I could contribute to it. And it's, I guess every week is a little bit different. And the participation has been very stimulating for me, but also it's been very confusing to figure out how to actually connect with either, like the overall gestalt of what's going on, in the group process, or with what where people individually seem to be coming from. And so at the moment, I can't really sort of reconstruct the process, but I went from thinking in terms of like a program, like an outline of a programmatic type of paper that, explains the importance of the concept of having a vision of utopia, and I don't know, like methodological approaches to get there, to refine it, to work together, and so on. And somehow it just morphed into this this kind of parallel sort of semi-fictional document where I take the point of view, indeed, of future historians that are looking back on this moment and looking back on us, and look at what we are doing from that perspective. And that turned out to be a pretty powerful way for me to sort of organize my thoughts. And I found that came together, and particularly for me, I guess my thoughts are very much sort of as indicated in the document around social practice and process as being the key to being able to move forward, to figure out how we can resolve differences within our own groups, I mean, within ourselves, within our personal relationships, social relationships. All these things seem very tied together to, sort of the contemporary current issue of, is like the American pseudo left and right going to just blow up the country or something, over what are in many ways imagined differences that that stand in dark contrast to our great alignment on so many real topics. So that's what the goal of the my fictional effort is, and it's just a few pages at the moment, but it well, hopefully, other people might find some interesting, it may provoke reactions that will be helpful in moving the process forward.
Okay. Did anyone else besides me have a chance to read Barry's paper? Okay, well, I did, and I made a couple of comments on it, and I'd like to give my first reader's report. Okay, number one, the method that we've chosen last week is obviously working, because Barry just reported, and I can testify, that he liberated something quite powerful in putting this in the future. And let me put in a parenthesis. Okay. Now, Barry has reported what his preoccupations were. He was moved to write this paper. And this again, having transformed it into a past fantasy about what went on in a similarly named group in the past, changed it and avoided what happens in all left groups, which is that as personalities and with people with a different political past, we begin arguing. There is no argument here. We're talking about something that happened 100 years ago. And of course, the original and marvelous of Barry's paper is that he put us in as characters. In fact, I had the same idea, which is to make it a self-fulfilling prophecy, that at some point in the 20th century, a group did that and their ideas went viral, blah, blah, blah. Okay? In fact, that's what we do with the game, the massive online game, billions and billionaires. We'll get to that another time. Okay, now, the other thing that was, I think, super about Barry's paper is that he projected his own ideas into the future that he'd like to see, okay? So in his future world, it's kind of like multi-partyism. There's religions and parties and all of these things, and there are conflicts. His realistic view is that the future won't be that different, or at least what he is interested in saying about the future includes this kind of openness and discussion and party-like things, but that are clearly, I don't think Barry intended them to be parties contending for power. So those are the original features of the paper, which I'd like you all to read and leave some written comments. Barry, would you like to add something before we move on to David?
Yeah, well, I apologize. Just, I mean, first of all, it was only finished and sent out last night, but also I only sent it to you and Fred, and I guess Brian. But I didn't really, I don't know, I wasn't sure about the process, so I figured that I'd leave it to you guys in terms of, you know, if it's something that we discussed this morning or something like that. So, I think most people probably didn't even get it. So I apologize for that. And well, thank you for your comments, Richard. Yeah. So that's my comment.
Well, Barry, your paper would well be discussed again when we get to the topic of politics later on in the semester of organization, the organization question. So you might want to post it there so that when we get there, we'll remember that it should be read for that discussion.
Well, there may be a new version by then.
Good. Okay, just to remind everybody, the procedure that we decided on is that what we call papers, that is to say things that are already in the past tense and somewhat transformed, got into the add to which hopper, okay? And then they're discussed online by people who use the comments on docs, and then discussed in class, and the presenter makes whatever changes he or she thinks, you know, and then we put it on the wiki in the appropriate place. And once we start filling up all these gaps in the wiki with the, you know, it's like a big crossword puzzle, or, you know, we fill in all of these things, and we will have a basic textbook. It will get transformed by writers who can add some characters to make it more dramatic and so on. That's our project. And so we function as if we were, in fact we are, a real live committee of historians. And we're going for sources from ancient times, that is, things written before 2017. We boil them down and plagiarize them, cut them up, and then extrapolate from them. So, and the other thing we do, excuse me?
you can answer this later. I was wondering, where is this add to wiki folder? So I couldn't find it in the Dropbox.
In the Dropbox, under topics, and it's in the catastrophes text, in the catastrophes folder, okay? Yes.
Last topics, catastrophes texts.
Got it, got
it.
All right. Now, the idea was that we filed them by topics. And presumably they're prepared for the topic's discussion of the topic under discussion. But they can also fit into other places. And what we're going to try to do is fill up this whole thing. But we'll deal with that later. David,
Yes.
you gave us a month or so ago your 4 futures.
Yeah.
And now you've transformed them and given the percentages slightly adjusted of the chances of each of these 4 futures, okay? And I would like you to concentrate, talking about this, on I believe it's the 3rd one, which is the one that really concerns us here. There's a la-di-da scenario in which everything is just fine. There's another one where the planet explodes or nearly. And well, why don't you say briefly what the 4 were, and then develop the one that concerns us here in terms of what we want to add to the wiki.
Okay, I'd be happy to do that. Let me just say that the first thing I put on there to wiki was 2117, which actually is now, right? No, it's
the future thing where your grandchildren are there.
Yeah, that's right.
David, I forgot. That's really more important.
And I went into a lot of concrete detail, imagining different aspects of that future, both physical, societal, and so forth, and try to be as specific as I could. Then I also posted a thing on geoengineering, but we're not going. That's sort of like following up from our last week's discussion. And then what you're asking me is the 3rd thing I posted, which was I really revised my 4 scenarios for 2050. So what I did was put everything in past tense, again, as you advised, to look back from 2017 and try to put the tense the right way. So the 4 futures, I'll start with the first was, things are pretty much the same as they are now. Well, that I changed that to 0.01% probability. Even lower. It's, I add something. I said China will be the uncontested capitalist hegemon in the world. That was one of the things I added. But otherwise, basically what that was saying that all of the climate scientists was pointing the wrong way. So it's basically taking the great wisdom of climate deniers and applying it, right? I say great wisdom with sarcasm, obviously. So the other 3, I'll start with the worst. The worst, I slightly lowered that probability, and it was similar to what Richard was telling us was the inevitable future. Well, I'd say that I don't really mean inevitable. You sounded like you were saying it's inevitable, but we had a good discussion. So I don't think it's inevitable.
I wrote you back that I think you were right.
Well, okay. I lowered that probability a bit. And so what it ends up with, the bad one, is that we're facing a future where the worst case, where hydrogen sulfide is going to start bubbling out of the ocean and poison everybody. Okay, that's actually a scenario from geochemistry, and I gave a reference there. That may be still valid. So let me then talk about the two most optimistic very briefly. So they're different triggers for the two. One is simply the unfavorable, the growing impact of climate change and the ever-growing inequality of income and wealth in the world, and capitalism basically becomes delegitimized by social movements. And that drives a very optimistic scenario. I think even more likely is another kind of trigger where actually and that's my fourth scenario, probably the most optimistic, that developments in renewable technologies actually enable ground up grassroots utilization of very cheap renewable energy, which undermines the legitimacy of the military-industrial complex. And that, again, leads to ever more powerful political movement, and that leads to an eco-socialist path out of capitalism. So that's my most optimistic, and probably I overestimated that. But I'm a wishful thinker, as you already know. So I'll close with that. Can't hear you, Richard. Okay.
Did you have a chance to read this? Jason, anybody online read David's Four Futures? Hello? Jason,
I'd have to reread it.
Okay, I'd like to make a couple of comments. I love David's humor and his sharpness, and it definitely helped this piece by putting it in the past. My suggestion as, let's say, a head editor of this textbook is that it needs to be revised very simply in the following ways: that the pieces should be taken separately under past, under then, how, and now. So the two positive scenarios, both of which are convincing, and David rightly keeps changing the percentage of likelihood. What I'd like to see you do, David, is combine them and simply say, while this was happening, that was happening. The delegitimization of capitalism, which, by the way, is a very, very important idea in Emanuel Wallerstein's view of capitalism's collapse in this period. And it's on the early pages, and this will be posted for Capitalism, next week's discussion topic. Okay, returning to David's paper, those two elements, instead of doing what David and I have done since we've known each other, which is I'm a revolutionary and he's really a reformist revolutionary, and he's more for a gradual change and believes in electoral politics and so on. We don't have to be in what?
David is shaking his head.
All right, well, if I've mischaracterized our positions, I apologize. I was just trying to make a point, which is this: that the great advantage of future historians' methodology is we put them both in. And because both inevitably will have some influence. So if it's 30 and 60% or whatever, that'll be for the reader to decide. Then finally, the worst case scenario, I think, can be put into the then in the form of saying that by 2017, these experts foresaw that if nothing basic changed, this would be the results. So all I'm saying is this, David, everything in there is very valuable, and for the purposes of a textbook for teenagers based on then, now, and how, what you need to do is just cut it into 3 pieces. And of course, what you say in your other paper, which I'd like you to talk about for a minute, the one on 2117, I thought it was just brilliant, and it's so chock-a-block with the ideas that each one of them would require to a picture, so to speak, so that people could imagine it. That's the reason I elaborated on this is I think it helps everybody to know how to present papers. They should be basically rough drafts of pieces of the narrative already. David, you want to say something about your big paper there? Your new one?
Well, I'm not, Richard, I'm not quite clear of what you want me to do to revise. You know what? Can I ask you to, like in a paragraph, put a paragraph on the kind of revision that you want? Because I'm not really clear what you're asking. You want then, now, and how, and combining the 4 scenarios. That's what I hear you say, and I'm really not clear on how that, how to do that. So can you, for our own guide, because I'm sure other people will be doing this sort of thing too, give us like a format, rather than just saying, you know, what you did. Because, and also I haven't had my cup of coffee yet, so my mind is a little bit muddled. I want to take a little break and get some coffee.
Oh, David, I love you. All right, what I promised to do early this week is give you on your paper, which is open for everyone to read, the instructions that I think would help make it useful to just plug right into the wiki. And that'll serve for everybody else to see what I'm trying to say. And then I will also send out a much clearer memo on how we should do this work, because that's what Barry's been asking for too, and it's necessary.
I'll ask David a question if you don't mind.
Yeah, go.
David, I'm just curious, in your scenario, in your 4 scenarios, which do you think is the most likely and which do you think would be the best?
Well, I put that in the text. I thought the most likely was the worst. You know, climate hell. We're ending up with a few hundred billionaires and their families living in a gated community up in the Arctic with nuclear power and, of course, organic agriculture. So that's what I thought was the worst case. Let me say, I don't, even with climate catastrophe, except for the real extreme, projections, like going to 4-degree warming by 2100, which I think is unlikely, but there are some that project a runaway greenhouse, which I think is not supported by the best modeling I've seen, even if it goes to 4 degrees. But okay, so that's the worst. The best was the one that I felt was, again, triggered by actually the technology advancing in renewable energy. I sort of put that in analogy to the steam engine and the Industrial Revolution. But remember, if you read Andreas Malm, you will find out in his book Fossil Capital that it's not such a simple relation, because he argues that the capitalists went to steam because it was much more conducive to controlling the workforce, okay, rather than being more efficient, okay? So the analogy I'm kind of making isn't perfect by any means. So I hope that answers your question.
I asked the question is because I'm wondering if there's a way to merge them, to find a balance that might be optimistic but more realistic than the extreme version, which would be terrific if it happened, because I think ultimately that's sort of the target here, is to try to conceive of something that factually could happen or would happen or did happen, as this case may be.
I'm not clear of what you're arguing. Why don't you sort of write that up? Yeah, right. Put it on the comment and add to Wiki, to the text. I think that's what we're advising us to do, you know, to comment on each paper in the file. Yeah. Okay, I'm gonna turn my mic off.
Yeah, I'd just like to second what Dan is saying, David. It's really kind of simple. You presented the 4 futures as being antithetical because you were making a rhetorical point, and you did very well and gave the percentages. What I think Dan is saying is that our method here is not but and. That is to say, everything gets thrown in so that we've got reforms and technological progress that is such that it undermines the carbon thing, and that's moving us in the right direction. To what extent, who knows? But we stick it in, okay? And at the same time, the social movements and the delegitimization of capitalism, and in that sense, you know, some sort of revolutionary worldwide movement, that also is included. They don't exclude each other. So now, where are we? Is there another paper? Could you put on the screen, please, the paper I wrote about the hunger crisis, the food crisis? Okay, now, just read the first paragraph, so could someone, I'm too far away to read. Oh, great. Would you give Fred the mic here? I'll do this.
Okay, Richard says, in 2008, record numbers of the world's poor experienced hunger. This at a time of record harvests and record profits for the world's major agri-food corporations. The contradiction of increasing hunger in the midst of wealth and abundance sparked food riots, not seen for many decades. Protests in Mexico, Morocco, Mauritania, Senegal, Indonesia, Burkina Faso, Cameroon, Yemen, Egypt, Haiti, and 20 other countries were sparked by skyrocketing food prices. In June 2008, the World Bank reported that global food prices had risen 83% over the last 3 years, and the FAO cited a 45% increase in the World Food Price Index in just 9 months.
Now, this is a rather We're so far away. Next time I'm going to come over here. All right. This is actually a rather short paper, and what it does is elaborate on that topic sentence by giving all kinds of examples and analyzing the structure and so on. It's absolutely beautiful. And it took me about an hour, because all I did is go down there. That's the footnote exactly. All I did was lift it pretty much verbatim from something that Brian posted, but forgot to tell anyone about, because he didn't follow the protocol for posting, which is you put your name and a short description of the piece and so on, and add it to the source list. So it was just at the bottom of the barrel down there, and I came upon it last night. So I didn't even get to the full end of it, but it deals with the two sides of this. Number one, how agrobiz and capital and so on, it destroys the peasantry and creates foods that are horrible and destroys the earth. But then the second part of it talks about the peasantry, the small farmers, and that despite the fact that they've been exterminated and closed and so on for 500 years, they're still there, and apparently they still feed the majority of the people on the planet. And there's, as peasantry is eliminated, there's also a new peasantry. And I know some of these people in France, of young, and here in the States, of young people, you know, of my daughter's age, educated, that decided to go back to the land and do this because of a love of it. And it's a political act. And so these two types of peasantries are coming together. Anyway, it's a marvelous study. I think what it was a part of an anthology, okay? And all I did was put the verbs in the past and take out the parts that were maybe too detailed. And I think that it's ready if the group, after the group has looked at it and made criticisms, to just stick it up on the wiki. In other words, the then is the easiest thing to do. It basically comes from finding good sources that are well written, that give a lot of information in a short place, and which open up towards the how. That is to say, that always deal with, or this could be from two different articles, right? The bad stuff of the then, and then the self-organization of the then. And so this is not a whole big deal, finally, to do what we're doing. We're really, as scholars, as future historians, our first task is quite simply to put together the sources and edit them, which is normal for putting together a textbook. The next thing we have to do requires our political imagination, which is to extrapolate them into the how. Okay, now, does anyone want to add anything to this discussion? Otherwise, we could move. Oh, wait a minute. There were two other categories there that we were supposed to discuss. All right, first of all, who's got something to say about the food crisis? There's another article that's in the Dropbox. What? Something weird is happening.
So Sam?
It's the only one whose mic is muted, at least.
It's like a cat got loose.
Okay. Sam is offline actually, but still.
Who's online? Say hello.
Hello.
Okay.
I think Sam is actually.
Jason is muted and so is David.
And so Sam, we're all
I'm
muted.
here.
All right, well, I was going to ask you to add to the discussion of the food crisis. All right, I will add. Okay, Fred.
Okay, I'm just going to swap cameras here for a second.
You're going to use your own, okay.
Yeah, no, let me get that mic, please.
Okay.
Good morning. I wanted to just say a few words about a couple of texts I put up, which were the excerpts from two books by Jason W. Moore. One article by that he wrote, or one from a book that he just published with Raj Patel called The History of the World in 7 Cheap Things. But the first excerpt that I put up was by Moore from his book on called Capitalism and the Web of Life. And what he lays out there is the notion of negative value, which I think is of more general use to us and may be especially useful to us next week as we discuss capitalism. The notion that capitalism goes through both recurring cycles of boom and bust, or of prosperity and crisis, but over time, over the 500-year history, it's moving into more of a secular crisis. And a moment is being reached in the historical development of capitalism where the value that capital produces for itself actually winds up producing, along with it, and in growing amounts of what he calls negative value, which is all of the different negative feedback loops that develop as capitalism encroaches more and more on the natural environment, and the notion that negative value is evidenced in things like the growth of superweeds in response to GMO crops, the climate crisis itself as a result of the use by capital of the atmosphere as a sink for its wastes, the deterioration of the maritime environments that, because again of climate change and of pouring carbon dioxide into the oceans, or the news that just came out in the last 10 days of the drastic decline in insect populations in certain parts of the world, whereas in the 1950s, if you drove your car down the interstate, your windshield would rapidly fill up with dead bugs. And that simply doesn't happen when we drive anymore, if anybody's noticed that, which is pretty alarming, in that insects are the base of the food chain in most ecosystems, and as well are also very important pollinators of food crops. So those are just some examples of negative value. And it's the kinds of things that the capitalist economists have traditionally termed externalities, things that capital doesn't have to worry about. But yet what we're seeing is that not only do we all have to worry about them, but capital itself is coming to a situation where they can no longer be ignored, or where their costs can no longer be simply passed on to the to working people. So that's elaborated further in the area of food in the other excerpt that I posted from the new book on the history of the world in 7 cheap things. And the notion of the 7 cheap things is that capitalism requires access to a lot of resources and a lot of different aspects of life that are that it needs to have presented to it in cheap or inexpensive or so-called free gifts of nature function in order for capitalist accumulation and exploitation to take place. There's this whole external sphere that's external to the production process that is nonetheless essential for the functioning of capitalism. Access to everything from the social reproduction of the labor force, caregiving work that's often, for the most part, done by women, by the the resources that are available for extraction from
the natural environment, from energy, food, labor, all of those things that capital needs to have available to it in an inexpensive form. And the more expensive those things get for capital, the deeper the capital finds itself in. So there's those two things. I know Sam in particular has been I guess a fan or a partisan of Jason Moore's work. You might want to say a little more about this negative value as it impacts food in particular, or the life world in general.
Okay. Anyway, oh, but my mic is up too loud. I'll hear just a second. Is that okay?
That's good.
Okay. Oh dear, we still got feedback. Oh well. Yeah.
Turn off your own speakers.
What's that?
Turn off your loudspeakers.
Your own speakers as you speak.
Okay.
Or turn down your own local sound.
Well, okay, I'll just turn them off. How's that?
That's good. It's all good for us.
I don't know what to do about that feedback situation. It means I can't hear anyone. At any rate, I think that the whole idea of feedback is really important to understanding how disastrous climate change is going to be. Because if you look at the statistics compiled from the Vostok ice cores in Antarctica, you can see that there's probably already enough carbon dioxide added to the atmosphere. You know, Petty et al., 1999 Nature magazine, to account for maybe 5 degrees of Celsius of climate change. Okay, and that what we're doing at this point is waiting for the feedback from that additional carbon dioxide. And that, I mean, you know, if you look at the graph carefully that Petty et al., or the graphs that Petty et al. Compile on the relationship between average global temperature and carbon dioxide level, you can't help but come to the conclusion that global warming, once the feedback effect fully kicks in, is going to be an exceedingly extreme phenomenon. So I don't really share much of an optimism about it not being 4 degrees by 2100. Okay, I think that the measurement we need to figure out is how fast is the feedback effect, and you know, because the feedback, once the feedback effect finishes feeding back, then you'll find out how much climate change exists. I also think that we've so far underestimated the power of socialism to result in reduced energy consumption possibility, simply because capitalism is so exceedingly wasteful in its energy usage, right? And that it creates large privileged classes of people whose basic function is to extract money from other people. And in order to pursue this creation, we have tremendous and rather unnecessary things like huge freeways full of cars that, you know, clog or these freeways every morning on, you know, Monday through Friday. And that, yeah, this is going to end up creating a huge negative value everywhere. Okay, and never mind the, you know, secondary negative values that come about due to the, you know, release of the methane clathrates from the permafrost in Siberia and in Canada and under the Arctic Ocean, or the negative values due to the acidification of the oceans, or the fishing clean of the oceans thanks to industrialized fishing. You know, treats the oceans basically as an extraction area, right? So negative value is pretty damn serious, and the real solution, of course, is socialism primarily, right? That all this other technical stuff might be useful. Of course, the main problem is that in order to be able to do anything, we need to be able to become free from this imperative of earning a living under capitalism, or keeping up with the Joneses, or basically maintaining our social status so that we can be part of this nice little club who has enough free time to do something about it. And socialism now. Anyway.
Right on. Can I comment on this? This is David. Can I have the floor?
Yes, go ahead.
First, Fred's point about global warming being a negative value, I think, was well taken. And I think one of the biggest examples of that is the stranded assets of fossil fuel in the ground. This is, even the financial industry is recognizing this as a huge challenge to fossil capital. There are trillions of dollars that cannot be burned. And even mainstream bankers are starting to understand that. I have a section, I'm going to post a section from my new book coming out on that, which has a lot of documentation. So actually, I think, again, being the eternal optimist, I think that this fact of stranded assets plus the resurgence of green capital can play out in class struggle with a much stronger movement, a bottom-up movement of beginning to actually getting effective mitigation before capitalism is replaced by socialism. And I think that's going to be absolutely necessary to avoid climate catastrophe. Now, quick points about what Sam was saying. I don't think in 1999, if I understand him correctly, that there was already enough CO2 in the atmosphere to produce 5 degrees of warming. I don't think that's supported by the latest science, climate science papers that I've read. And several of them point, of course, they emphasize we have to have mitigation, absolute mitigation beginning very soon. That is, the emissions topping off soon and then reducing. But it is true that we need to bring the CO2 level down below 350. And that has to be part of the mitigation program. Now, this last point, in terms of the room for conservation and reduction of energy consumption in the world, I've actually just looked into this very closely in several papers, and the most recent that I pointed to in the symposium on post-carbon, I go into it further. The fact is that, of course, there is extreme waste of energy in the global north, particularly the United States, where the consumption per person is like equivalent to 9 kilowatts per person. But several countries in Europe have close to 3 kilowatts per person, and that's roughly the minimum that is necessary for a high life expectancy in the world. And most of the people in the world live below that. So we have to take into account, with changes in technology which make the end use of energy more efficient and require less primary energy production, we have to take into account this aspect. And finally, there are at least 4 different areas that we need more energy now to mitigate climate change and to clean up the mess that the military-industrial complex has left us. And that's also spelled out in my most recent paper, so I won't belabor that. But it includes sequestering carbon from the atmosphere. It includes creating green cities and electrifying rail and expanding that, hooked up, of course, to solar power. And of course, it also means cleaning up the plastic in the ocean to the extent we can. And of course, preventing more going in. Radioactive contamination. Again, the legacy of the military-industrial complex. All of these issues which existing fossil capitalism is not addressing has to be addressed in a transition in a post-capitalist world. And we got to start the fight for this now. That's my point. So finally, I would conclude that when we reach a steady state world under solar communism by 2117, I'm sure it's going to be that date for sure, we'll probably need about twice as much energy in the world as now. Thank you. But for specifics, I'll share the link to the article on the Dropbox, and I'll also send it out to everyone by email that's on the call today.
Okay. Comments?
It's, what's his face wants to talk?
Someone?
Sam.
Sam?
Yeah. Unmute.
Unmute, Sam.
Okay.
There you go.
Okay, good.
Now you
Give him the thumbs up. Nope, no, he muted himself.
Oh.
unmute.
So we do this.
Look at what y'all need to look at are two things, okay? Take a look at the Anderegg paper that I've posted in the comment section. All right, the scientists have been tempering their results to fend off challenges from deniers. All right, this has been established. It's the one about type 1 and type 2 errors that they've been making. They make all of a certain type of error, but not all of another type of error, in order to make climate change look like less of a problem than it really is, because they don't want deniers calling them on their stuff. Also, take a look at the mathematical relationship established in Petty et al. 1999. The idea that we didn't have enough CO2 in the atmosphere by 1999 to account for 5 degrees global climate change is irrelevant. It's the mathematical relationship established in the paper that matters, okay? And that mathematical relationship is really pretty much, Svante Arrhenius knew about it in 1896, all right? It's that as, increase in 50% of atmospheric carbon dioxide is more or less 5 degrees. All right, it's inverse logarithmic, and that's the where we're at right now with 405 parts per million. If you think you got a better mathematical relationship and a better scientific paper to demonstrate it, I'd like to see it.
This is wonderful.
I'll give you about 10 very recent ones, okay, from the climate science, and they're not.
I see. And what does Anderegg think about them?
They're not optimists. They're not trying to fudge it. Okay.
No, that's true.
Well, so
What I'm saying is that in some respects, I think we're all in agreement that whatever the math is that there's something not good. And I think that's really, at least for the non-mathematicians in the room,
Right.
that clearly we're encountering issues.
I'm with Dan on that. And it brings us to a point that I want to discuss in the second half of the class, when we get through the papers and the topics, which is what to do with all of this marvelous information. Because we have in this group of future historians some of the biggest brains around the world in this. You know, Harry on the internet, and David on science, Sam obviously, and each of us has tremendous expertise. So the important thing is to be able to boil it down and make it part of a textbook for teenagers that will serve as a primer to people about what's really going on now in the then part. Because when we put it in the past tense, it's a matter of course that it happened. And if you have disagreements about how it was, you say, at that time, people, one prediction was even worse than the next. And that's how you deal with it, okay? Because although it's fascinating to be in a room with people who know 10 times as much as Dan and I do about it, we have to constantly keep our eye. We're not going to read long papers that use math. And what I'd like people to do is, yes, put up the papers, but then write a précis of them, or use the copy and paste thing, take the nut out of it, and put it in some sort of summary. That's what we've been saying from the beginning. Because it would take a month to read everything that's in the Dropbox right now, just on this category. So it's all great to have it, but we need to then extract from it. We're an extractivist group of taking that information, putting it in the past, and then teasing it out of it, okay, the future. Now, I don't want to leave this discussion without at least mentioning the other issues that were on the agenda, which is epidemics and the atomic crisis. And someone wrote in that war was another one, but we didn't have the time to do that. And there's a section coming up on violence that we can discuss that under. So the atomic thing, I just posted 2 or 3 things of a very ordinary thing. I posted a paragraph from the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists, which since right after Hiroshima has been keeping track of everything threatening the world. And they have this clock, and the clock is approaching midnight. It started out at 17 to midnight. And then when the Russians got the H-bomb, it went down to 2 minutes. And then with one thing or another, it went back and forward. But the latest one, which they published in the middle of the year and used a half of a minute for the first time, is since Trump's election. Okay, so we're now back to the most dangerous time, 2 minutes to midnight. And what they've done, as they've been doing all along, is include social and political crises and diplomatic crises, and increasingly the climate crisis. So all of this is factored in. And we certainly will quote that in our narrative, but we need a little more information than just that paragraph, okay? I also posted a couple things about the Fukushima and before it, the Chernobyl disaster. And Alexei and Yulia and I have been in the Ukraine, and we've held conferences. Schwarzperson was there too, with people from Ukraine who gave us firsthand information. And what happened to the cleanup crews, like they're all dead or dying and their children all have 2 heads. It's absolutely terrible, the destruction. And as I pointed out, in both cases, the authorities are covering it up. So we really don't know how bad Fukushima was, nor how bad Chernobyl was officially, but we could guess. And what I don't have there is what I know about, which is that all of France is powered electrically by atomic generators that are all of the same generation. And one of them has already shown cracks. They're about 20 years over there. You know, what is it? Yeah, right. So if there's a crack in one, there's going to be a crack in all of them, right? It's like the 1937 Dodge. It's either, they're all the same. Anyway, there's that happening in the US. We've had 3 Mile Island. And we know that with all of this crazy talk about security everywhere, the gosh darn electric companies are not willing to spend money to get serious guards and walls around these things. So, you know, the easiest thing for terrorists to do is to get in there and do God knows what. So this is a very, very serious problem, and we've got to have at least a paragraph or 2 about it. So we need people to look into that. And then the third catastrophe, which is not quite blooming yet, is mass epidemics, pandemics, okay? We've had the SARS thing, and we've seen how quickly they can develop. But there are also massive revivals of deadly killers like anthrax, and what's the one now all over in Haiti that comes from dirty defecation in the water?
Dengue.
No, cholera. Cholera is back. TB of a type that the antibiotics can't cure is back. There's a whole generalized phenomenon of overuse of antibiotics that started in the 40s. I used to get daily huge injections of penicillin. I don't know why, because my mother was nuts. Whenever I had a runny nose. So, but the doctors went along with that. So as a result of all that, the drugs don't work anymore. And then for the diseases that kill off the poor, the pharmaceutical companies aren't willing to invest in them. They'd rather have Botox and Viagra and things that they can get big fees out of the rich. And of course, we know about the opioid thing, which was all done by one company for what?
The Sackler family.
The Sackler family, a noble family that has given huge art museums and the like. So this is the nature of the pharma world. And I think that, David, I'm not going to use the word inevitable, but the chances are very high. You could start putting Schwarzman type percentages on it, and they'll go up and down as evidence accumulates. And that's exactly the correct scientific attitude. But what I'm talking about is mass epidemics that reduce the population in the world in ways parallel to the Black Death during the Middle Ages. Now, social historians have shown that the Black Death had one positive result, if you will, and that is that it produced a labor shortage. And that labor shortage enabled the yeomen of England and the poor farmers and artisans and so on in other places to get rights for the first time. Serfdom and slavery were imposed later when there was a labor surplus. And when first under Oliver Cromwell, or even before that under Queen Elizabeth, they enclosed the lands and drove the peasants off their land in order to create a relation, which then they shipped to the Americas, and they put in the ships to rule the waves and so on, and basically disenfranchise them, displace them, and then turn them into semi-slaves. So it seems to me that we would be remiss as future historians if we didn't do a description of what I think is very likely to be a mass die-off. And the reasons for that are threefold. First of all, the climate crisis and the wars crisis that Beth wants us to look into have each of them in its own way produced unprecedented movements of poor people around the globe. This idea of mass emigration from countries affected by famine, totally unnecessary, totally the result of capitalist intervention, famines, wars, all of this has got billions of people, more and more, on the move. And no matter what is done, and nothing good is being done right now, about this crisis, they will be poor people who will be undernourished, who will be living in unsanitary conditions with a very high likelihood of viruses and all kinds of other things spreading. And we have an example of that in Haiti, because the intervention of the United States and France after the hurricane, the previous one, and from the beginning was to destroy any chance of democracy, to put the Tonton Macoute back in the terror power, and to once again occupy Haiti, has been done, I don't know, 28 times, I believe, by the US. And with the result that disaster aid gets turned into military occupation, as it semi-happened in New Orleans, and Puerto Rico, and that this is leading in Puerto Rico, as we speak, to epidemics and all kinds of things. So we have to look at that in the medium term as hopefully not inevitable, but to a greater or lesser degree, highly likely. And as I say, it seems heartless to say it, much less even to think about it, but one of the results will be that there will be a labor shortage, and that the capitalists can't do without labor. And that's the nature of capitalism, is to have an ambivalent attitude towards labor. They can't live with it, and they can't live without it. Workers do the work. And no matter how many times they try to refute Adam Smith and Marx of the labor theory of value, it's bullshit, okay? So they've got to have labor to extract value. But their intention in every invention, like steam, is to control and eliminate labor. As the more recent New Yorker of 2 or 3 weeks ago has a major article on studying automation in 2 or 3 locations in the United States. And this is very serious. And it's happening in China on a massive scale. Why? Because, and forgive me for saying this, but as I've been saying for a long, long time, the strikes and class struggles in China are mammoth. They're big, they're like the USA in the 30s, only on an even bigger scale. And they've been successful, not in overthrowing the totalitarian state, but in raising the price of labor, so that the Chinese need to get rid of workers, because otherwise they can't compete with the Vietnamese and the Indians and everybody else. So that is why I think we need to look more into this issue of epidemics, pandemics, I think they're called.
If I can make a little comment. What's going through my mind is I'm listening to Richard, and I'm thinking about the discussion previously, values, is that maybe it's important to make at least a brief note that today there's an important political strategy that is being built around a hysteria about the prospect of negative values. So that's kind of an awkward way of putting it, but I'm referring to Bannon. Strategy of sort of mobilizing the masses against various impending catastrophes that can all be lumped together in some ways as being negative values produced by capitalism. So to say than that, I think it's an important thing to think about how reactionary political entrepreneurs are responding to the kinds of things we're talking about, and how that has to be about in terms of how it is we get from here to where we want to be.
Barry, I love you because you always come up with the negative, and the negative is inevitable and is the spring of the dialectic, as Peter Hewlett constantly reminds us. So, what I want you to do with your marvelous negativity is to write a paragraph or two about this, what you just said, and put it in the past tense. And then I will, or someone else will, steal a few paragraphs from Wallerstein, who in his Utopistics points out that the delegitimization of capitalism is essential to its collapse. It's not only the decline in the rate of profit and the rest of that stuff, that when they start precisely denying climate change and at the same time trying to whip up the public and so on, their lies become more and more obvious as time goes on. And so both phenomena are real. But since we're playing a game, right? And the game is that in these fights, the good guys always win. Now, the odds against this may be very, very high, okay? But remember that we're playing a game. And the game is that if there is one... What?
I have not forgotten.
Okay. No, but I'm preaching to everybody. The game is that if there's one chance of winning, we make that predominate so that we can build up in all of these different areas the positive and make it credible that there are historians in the world in 2117. More comment, please.
I want to just briefly comment on your scenario of the Black Death. I think it should be also pointed out, I think I learned this from Sylvia Federici's book, Caliban and the Witches, that women became very powerful in medieval society. Of course, then the witch hunts were used to destroy that. But it's that was another positive outcome, Richard, of the Black Death that I think should be pointed out. And let's not underestimate the power of women's movements around the world as a countervailing force to deal with the challenges that you're talking about regarding the pandemic. Certainly, we should not minimize that in any sense. But there are also some new medical discoveries that regarding antibiotics and actually using it's an old Russian approach to treating bacterial infections with what was it called, a bacteriophage?
What?
A virus, I believe. Correct me if I'm wrong. So there are countervailing approaches to that, which don't make it inevitable, and I think would lower the prospect. Finally, your outline of reduction of population is, I would say, refreshing in regarding these predictions of the neo-Malthusians. So I would take that as a positive. Actually, no, not really, but I think the population issue is something we haven't discussed, and I think it should be, it certainly should be dealt with in our discourse, because there's a strong movement among Greens in particular that love to invoke the neo-Malthusian scenarios, and I think they're basically fallacious. And Ian Agnes' book, and I forget the co-author, Too Many People, ? I think is a really great text to look at on that issue.
David, I'll ask you to post that and to make a précis of it, to boil it down so that it'll be ready like a filet to New York Times to be put up on the wiki. I want to appreciate, by the way, your quotation from Sylvia Federici's book, Caliban and the Witch, about the empowerment of women after the Black Death. And what her book is about is how during the Renaissance and the early scientific period, very people who discovered science, like Bacon and so on, that were at the same time superstitious and persecuting witches and driving women out of the healthcare profession and so on and so forth, and creating this really disempowering women during that whole period, which is supposedly a progressive and enlightened period. So that's very important. And when we get there's a whole topic on women, and that will definitely be part of it. But of course, these topics are just ways to study things. We move it all together when we make this. More comment on this?
I wanted to say a little more about.
Could you give him the mic?
Here, we swap cameras. Bada bing. Yeah, I just wanted to go back to the nuclear piece a little bit, because there is I mean, the scope of that is yet to be determined, but it's not so much the fact that capital is now going to turn to nuclear power to offset the energy crisis. It's just too expensive and too fraught with problems, which the capitalists are as aware of as we are. And those problems are immense that Richard started to talk about. The fact that throughout the world, all the nuclear plants that were 60s and 70s, or 50s, 60s, and 70s are now aging rapidly, and are going to be breaking down in various ways. And the cost of either keeping them in operation or phasing them out are huge. Once you have a nuclear plant that's been in operation for 20 or 30 years, it's accumulated vast amounts of waste. Its core has, the protective mechanisms around the core have deteriorated, and you can't just shut them down and walk away. They have to be dismantled carefully and at great cost. And it's really puzzling to me how the capitalists who own these plants now are going to cope with that problem as it develops.
They're not. No.
And it's possible that they're not, because they won't have enough resources available to do it. The state, the states will, and large capitalist enterprises will not devote the resources that's necessary. So we will be left to just, avoid those zones, and there will be more and more zones like Chernobyl, not necessarily because they had catastrophic failures, but because they were just deteriorated over time and began to emit enough radiation that they became too dangerous to.
Except for poor people.
Except, again, for poor people who will suffer the health consequences of that.
Very important. Very important. Well, I got depressed this whole week.
Really?
This has been, I literally had a kind of nervous breakdown. And yesterday I was popping Xanax as I was preparing this morning's agenda. So if there's one chance in 100,
right,
maybe our wonderful textbook, Utopia, will go viral. And this will help for the great synergy of different movements and of the contradictions of capitalism to get us through this century. Now,
David likes it. All right, David, David's given the solidarity. Yeah.
David, I agree with you, by the way, that we need to deal with the problem of population. And you can write up the whole argument against the Malthusians very easily. We all know that the easiest way that always works to control population is to educate women.
Right.
Because as soon as women can read and write and make their own choices, they're going to have one child or two children. Or no child, or no children. And some will have 3 or 4 because they love kids. And none of that is going to create a huge problem. And in fact, we now know that the one-child policy of China under Mao has resulted in a labor shortage, which is why the Chinese are automating faster than the Americans, because we've already thrown too many people out of work. And the Americans don't need to do that so much. So now I'd like to turn to a question of our organization.
What to do.
What to do.
Wait,
Okay.
before you do that, Richard, I just want to mention an article in today's Washington Post headline, an example where communist government actually is successful. And this relates to the population. It's very surprising to see this on the front page of the Washington Post, but they're talking about Kerala, the state of Kerala, where Amartya Sen, of course, wrote about this quite a while ago on how attacking poverty and social programs actually did precisely what you were arguing regarding the role of women and so forth in stabilizing the population. But I invite people to read it. Thank you. I just want to interject. It was really interesting.
Wonderful. All right, so that's exactly the kinds of things that make this seminar work. Because we all watch the news and read in our own, you can call that field, right? Our own places that we're interested in. We come across this kind of stuff, and by making a little more conscious effort, knowing that we're part of this seminar, we can keep bringing up the essential sources. But remember that we can't load our colleagues down, who are not specialists in our chosen topic, readings. What we have to do is post them so that anyone can go into detail that wants to, but then also summarize them, excerpt them, and prepare them, fillet them, if you will, so as to put into the dinner that we're preparing of then, now, and how. So
I make an announcement, Richard.
Yeah.
Very important announcement. Roger Federer just beat Del Potro in the final at Basel. I was distracted by watching it with the sound off. I'm a Federer fan, and I had to announce that. It's deep from my heart. But I'm going to probably miss next week because I'll be in Caracas. Okay, I'm sorry.
Well, not at all. Not at all. I'll quote you the name of your favorite TV show, Curb Your Enthusiasm. Now, to go back to this question, all right, we have organized ourselves a study group that deals consecutively with a series of topics. And Fred, could you put just the list on the screen? All right, we started out with a curriculum, and then as time has gone on, we've added the topics, new topics, and in this particular case, we've had to expand the topic because there was so much material in it, okay? And so we have also added area studies. Somewhat on the model of universities, but not really. We are painfully aware that we don't have participants yet in an active way from any of the areas other than the Russia area, okay? Russia, Ukraine, and so on. We have somebody in North Africa who also covers Black Africa, but he's on trial for 5 years in prison. And I haven't been able to activate him. Okay, that's Mati Monji. But the question is that if we write a textbook, it's inevitably going to be focused on the richer countries of Europe and America. So what we have to do is study these others, gather the materials, get people in there in our group to help us with that, with each one of these areas. And then after we've done that study, and also along the way, add to the general narrative so that it isn't so lily-white, okay? And European. So that's part of the agenda. And how are these topics supposed to be run? Okay, the syllabus calls for, and Barry has asked for, and so has Dan and others, to break down into groups and spread the authority and the work around so that we begin to function as a real collective. So I asked you last week to think of areas of interest to you, something that you know about, something that you care about, something that you want to look into, and to pick at least 2 of them because we need to spread around, and also to pick a geographical area, Sub-Saharan Africa or Middle East and so on. And what we need to do now is sign up. We could do this right now, starting right now, and then add. We need people to head up these teams and to recruit more people to the teams, okay? So, for example, this has already happened more or less spontaneously so far. Brian has been the person that's been supplying us with a lot of stuff about ecology and agriculture and so on. David has done the lion's share of the work on energy and related topics. Fred has brought up lots of stuff about the ecological crisis and He's running a course on the Anthropocene and so on. I'm going to handle next week stuff about capitalism, but I need more people on my team. So this is the way that we need to function. But our problem has been last-minutism. That is to say, we're discussing papers that were posted late last night, and we're supposed to have read giant tomes that were posted in the middle of the week. So
it's been a problem.
What?
It's been a problem, I agree.
Okay, well, thanks to your nudging, dear Barry, we're going to solve that problem, okay? And that is that we need to, each of us, sign up, and those that aren't here, they may get assigned. That'll serve them right for not showing up, to take responsibility, or to take major responsibility for a number of topics. All right. So obviously David is going to be ex officio, the head of the team for energy, and Brian for agriculture and ecology, and me for capitalism economics, because I've devoted my life to studying it and so on. And there may be some other obvious ones. But these team leaders need people that work with them, okay? And people need to come forward, whether they have just interest and expertise or curiosity, and simply raise their hand and say, all right, I'll work on this, that, and the other topic, okay? Now, this will take the weight off the shoulders of Fred, me, and Brian, and David, who have been kind of carrying this, and spread this around. And it will also empower other people to put their stamp and their ideas on it. Okay, now, what are the functions of the teams? All right, it's no great big deal. The function is to post and to filter the sources, okay? So to keep an extra special eye out for whatever your subject is, and to solicit from other people, and so on, to do a little bibliographical homework, and make sure that not the week before, but at least 2 weeks before your topic comes up in the curriculum, the stuff is online. Also, to make sure that the stuff gets posted in the following way. Whoever posted it, their name. The second thing is the URL followed by the actual title. And then the third thing is the number of pages and a brief summary or a quote or something, so that people can know how much time to devote for it and whether they're that interested. But the main thing that we'd like the teams to do is to filter to a certain extent the postings, okay? To begin to boil them down and fillet them, so that as a result, the people that are in the seminar don't have to wade through a whole bunch of stuff, but can read digests and can do some intelligent discussion and editing. Because remember, we're writing a textbook for young people. So that boiling down, that's a part of the function of the teams. And then when the day of the topic comes up in the curriculum, the teams would take responsibility for the agenda and sort of guide the meetings so that it isn't always Fred or me. And speaking of Fred and me, we will continue to function as the backup. Fred more for the technical side, and me for the, let's say, pedagogical side or Dragon Master side, so that you won't be stuck out there alone. has brought up something very important this morning. And that is the question of our dreams, our visions of the future, that is to say, of now. And so what I'd like each of the teams to do is start posting on the now, right, directly on the wiki, whatever thoughts they have, and inviting everybody else. Just put up in one sentence or 2 words or a paragraph something about their vision for the world that we want. And everybody will do this. This is a process that the ad business discovered, and it's called brainstorming. And it consists of no self-censorship or censorship of anyone else. It consists of like throwing at the wall. It's usually in a room with a big bulletin board. But in this case, the wiki is our international big bulletin board. In short form, something about the visions. And as we do the readings, right? Everything that inspires us, oh, wouldn't it be great if it were this way, okay? Just put it right on up. And then when we come to the actual class discussion, we'll devote some time and we can then brainstorm out loud, in person, based on the things that are already up, elaborate that picture. Because as Dan pointed out, the main idea of the future historians is to look backward. If we have an idea of a just, sane, peaceful, democratic society, and we can make that idea come to life, then it becomes easy for us and credible to our readers to look back from that possible society that is so attractive, because we'll all put our hearts in it and the things that we most desire. Looking back from there, I don't think we're going to have too many political differences that can't be solved by the principle of variety when we come to the how. You know, there are certain futures that are not compatible with certain methods. The ends don't always justify the means, or to put it in a more philosophical way, nature of the ends logically eliminate certain types of means. So if we've got our ends clear, and we have no problem as historians to know what's wrong in 2017, then the hardest part, which is the how, will start to fall into place. The things in the now, in the then, that anticipate, for instance, people organizing on the ground to ameliorate the conditions after a disaster, and this getting, I think our main contribution is that we'll show in the how these groups of resistance organize internationally. That is what is new in the world today that makes revolution possible when it wasn't in 1917.
2000.
What?
2017.
No, we're talking about, we're celebrating 1917, and we'll certainly get into that under the topic of internationalism. But I think we can all agree here, whatever our political backgrounds are, that the Bolsheviks took power in Russia with the perspective that this would be the first step in an international revolution. That was absolutely clear, and everything they all said at the time, that they were throwing down the gauntlet and betting on the world revolution. And when the revolution was confined to Russia and attacks but wasn't crushed like the Paris Commune. Obviously, it started to get deformed, and this was not inevitable, but was the result of concrete political, historical reasons. So I'm just going to try to summarize this and get back on the main point. What the teams will do then is gather sources and boil them down a little bit and set up the discussion, write some papers and solicit papers based on that, and then start populating the future for us in 2017. Start throwing ideas for the future pell-mell onto the wiki. And maybe the day or two, a few days before the class, put them in some kind of order, the way they do when they hold those brainstorming, sessions. So put everything together that goes together, and then we'll brainstorm in class, and on that we can start elaborating collectively our vision of the future. So that's what I'm proposing, and I'd like to have your reactions. Oh my God, it's 1 o'clock. All right.
Barry says he's leaving soon, and Sam just checked out. So.
Oh, okay.
Where time is of the essence. I suggest that Richard put what he just said in an email, and we solicit by email volunteers to have the various teams.
That's exactly what I had planned.
Okay.
Okay, but I wanted some feedback from the participants, and in fact, because we got here early and Dan started talking to me, I've altered significantly the plan that I came in with, because while having a nervous breakdown, when my Xanax clicks in, I have some good ideas at home, because that's all I do is think about this thing, and it's driving me crazy. And I hope you will all step in there and make it work more by itself.
Can I summarize that a little bit?
Yeah.
Grab the mic there.
Okay. Let me grab the mic. I think and again, I'm not sure that I'm saying my own thing. I think we're all in agreement to some degree or another. My sense of this, what appealed to me about this project in the first place, was the idea of getting multidisciplinary people, disparate disciplines, different types of academias together to then world build, to create a situation where we had a future that was functional, plausibly functional, and know that we had conceived of it based in hard fact, based in people who have real expertise in these areas. And I think that we have some of it. In fact, just the people sitting here right now, which is now just 5 of us, there's at least 2 or 3 other people that have been involved to one degree or another that represent some other areas. But in my mind, and again, I actually think this is a little different than what Richard has been sort of targeting here, and I think that's okay, is that we want to break people out into not only their areas of expertise, but to set up teams where they are beginning to really come up with what that will look like. So what is the financial world of the future of 2021-17 look like? What is our energy grids and things of that nature look like? What do our food supplies look like? And any number of other things that we could talk about, and break them down into those groups, and then find the right people who we have amongst ourselves to kind of champion each, and then, amongst ourselves, try to find more people that bring expertise to this, more people that have solid, expertise. People who are interested and have great ideas is good, but I think experts is really what we would like to get, and then somehow have those groups solidify
some kind of oral presentational component of each group. So again, we have a group that does what the economic world is going to look like, what the environmental situation is going to be, what is our energy, what is our food sources. I think that the internet, our entertainment, our communications, these types of things, I think are all, and again, we should put together a list of what these groups are. And then each group has its own ability, its own autonomy isn't even quite the right word, but its own fiefdom, if you will, its own area where they're working on what does that functional world look like? What are the functional elements of that? Then once you have the 10, 15, 20 different factors, different groups, different components, then we can come back together. And at that point, we do have a couple of people who are not here today who are playwrights and writers. I have a lot of fantasy writers and artists, conceptual people who can then use some of this stuff with the guidance of these groups, which are driven by fact, to conceive of this future world that we have now built. And that to me is the most, I mean, I love it. To me, I'm just so excited about that prospect. I think it's really a very, very worthwhile. And I do believe, as I say, and I'm not just cheerleading it, is we have enough people here now with enough expertise to at least begin the process of the big ones. We've got the economic expertise. I feel like I've learned so much about solar energy and other types of that kind of stuff. And I know there's more to it, that they're the internet people, the communications people, that we have the groups. And if we can put them together and let them, as I say, create almost their own component, if you will, a chapter in that textbook or multiple chapters in the textbook, then the textbook can be a primer for any number of board games or comic books or fantasy fiction novels or any number of things, which I do believe will ultimately be more compelling and interesting to a wider audience. Right?
Well, Dan, you're inspiring and much more eloquent than I can ever be. Right. I think you've just expressed exactly what I am proposing. Right. And so among the things I'll ask people to do is take a good second look at those topics to make sure that, you know, we don't need to add one or combine two or something like that. But once we do that, this is you presented an exciting vision of what we're doing, and we need to precisely put the cart before the horse, okay? Right. But starting with the future and looking backward. Right. So on this note of harmony, if there's no one else that wants to add something?
I'd like to add something. I want to just briefly suggest we have a team called Prefigurations, Theory and Practice of Prefiguration. I think it interfaces with the others, but you know, again, being the perennial optimist, I think we need to emphasize what exists in terms of social movements and creativity around the world that is contesting the rule of capital. So
well, that's exactly what we'll be doing week after week, topic after topic.
Thank you. And what it was, I didn't get the name of the person that just spoke. Was it Stan? Or
Dan.
Dan, that's what I thought.
Dan Hurt.
Thank you. I thought I got it the first time. Thank you. A very good summary of what we are about to do.
And that's really why I'm here.
Well, then you can be the agent of this and keep kicking us in the ass.
Because the truth is I view myself a little bit at a loss in terms of the academic firepower here. So I'm more than happy to do some of the heavy lifting and again, some of the more conceptual organizational elements.
And Harry,
that is my expertise.
Harry Halpin, who is like David at the very top of his field, when he came here, and saw that we are a group of some academics, but not ruled by academics and not an academic approach, and that we've got workers and people of all different areas of life. And I think that that's very special. And he found that very, very attractive.
I think it is. Barry.
Bye, folks.
What Barry wanted to
Oh,
say.
Barry, excuse me.
Yeah, well, I'll just be very straightforward. I really like, you know, the vision that Richard put out. I really appreciate Dan's comments. I think Dan's comments are very good, and the whole direction things are moving in is good. But I think we have to take recognition of things. The one thing is that there's been a steep decline in participation. Completely understanding. And the second thing is that the scope of this project is in fact very big, and that something that we have to come to terms with in terms of in relation to the format that we started out with. So this may be something we can discuss in the future. I don't mean to start a prolonged discussion right now.
Okay, the method is to cut it down to bite-sized pieces.
Right.
Bite-sized pieces, put them up for better or for worse, and then when it's all together, go back over it and turn it into some kind of a more unified.
But also, if I have anything to say about it, what I'm hoping to do to address, again, it's not a secret. It's not even the elephant in the room. We're all aware of exactly what you just brought in, is that we've had a decline in participation as the scope keeps growing. Is that what I'd like to see happen, and again, I'm just going to call out the 5 people that are sitting here right now, is to circle our wagons around us and to be able to, and there's a couple of others, and to be able to assign different groups and different specialties so that perhaps it's not so overwhelming, is that you can really do, I assume, David, you're going to a summit next week. There's going to be some people there that may not want to participate with us every week in this format, but might be very interested in participating with you on your part of all of this. And so now you have a subgroup that's dealing independently. And by the way, as I said to Richard, is nobody cares if you guys talk on the phone at 2 in the morning on a Thursday. It's your business now. That's what you guys are doing. And then you return with the information, with the things that this group can then use. And I think if we do that, that we will not only be able to recruit new people who are more appropriate for what we're doing, but we'll also be able to kind of diffuse the situation where there isn't this pressure. My feeling is, and God help us, by the way, this has been such a stressful frickin' day, such a depressing topic. All of you guys really making me feel sad about the state of the world. And I actually believe that we're under enormous pressure. I know that Richard does too. I think a lot of people feel very much, and I certainly do, is that we're under enormous pressure to now try to, if this world's going to get salvaged, it's going to have to happen very quickly. But setting that aside, this is a 3 to 5 year project. This is a 7-year project. To put this is a 20, it's a lifetime project. But certainly just to get the boat in the water, we're barely in the water as it is. We probably, you know, whatever. We've got another couple of weeks of this before we're ready. But the one thing I will say, which I see right now, is David, you're going to some seminar in South America. Please, you're in charge. Find 3 people that want to work on what does that look like. The areas that you're dealing with. What does that look like? Put together your own team and make them yours and understand what the bigger picture is and how what you're doing fits into the larger picture. And I believe, as I say, that if we do that, that not only will we take pressure off of these meetings on Sundays, which are a little early and kind of overwhelming in scope, but also will give us the opportunity to recruit. Yes, there's our newest recruit.
Yes, the Mousy Fan. And I already have a relationship with Quincy Saul, who organized this, main organizer for this meeting convocation in Venezuela. Go to Eco-Socialist Horizon website. We did a paper together for CNS on how Venezuela could lead a solar transition to Latin America. So that will actually be part of my topic to talk in Caracas. And a lot of Venezuelans are quite interested. They've been over-relying on oil, obviously, and they realize, and they are, by the way, the only two countries in the world that call their path eco-socialist are Venezuela and Bolivia, even though I think Cuba is on the cutting edge, even though they haven't self-identified that, they haven't named it that. But I will certainly follow Dan's excellent proposal. Absolutely. We'll get more people involved. Absolutely. Thank you. And I'm going to, Richard, it's getting late.
Yeah, well, I'm ready to go back to bed. Thank you, all of you. Thank you, Dan. And, you know, if there is one chance of 100, we got to do it, and we're doing it. Bye.
See y'all next week.